Hello, hello, and it already is freezing and lagging. Oh, okay. Hello! Welcome to the first of many videos going over what media I consumed in 2023 and what I thought about it, and going over some of my favorites and what have you. We are starting with Western TV. That is all the TV I watched that wasn't anime. Obviously, there will be several videos about anime coming shortly. Most of the stuff on this list actually aired in 2023, but I'm also including stuff I watched for the first time that was older. But I'm not including stuff that I rewatched. Like, there's no section on rewatching seasons of 30 Rock for like the 30th time. These are roughly in the order that I watched them, but I've also scored them in the same way that I do for my seasonal anime reviews. And I'll try to kind of explain what motivated each score so that you have a sense of where my recommendation or not is coming from. We're starting off with the show Kevin Can Fuck Himself. This is a interesting show where the gimmick is basically trying to figure out what would life really be like for the archetypical character of the beleaguered, long-suffering housewife character, who's usually much more reasonable and intelligent and conscientious and practical than the oafish husband character in a traditional sitcom. And the way they do this is by presenting it half as a traditional multi-camera sitcom, everything very brightly lit, laugh track, everything you would expect from a sitcom from the 80s, 90s, even earlier. And then as soon as the husband character is out of frame and it's just kind of the wife on her own, it completely switches gears to like the kind of moody lighting, intense, single camera, cinematic, prestige type show, which is of course kind of like the dominant genre of popular television today. At first, the premise is kind of like the shock factor of this, the moments where you see her step into the kitchen from the living room and she's just like seething with anger or in total despair and disappointment at her husband's harebrained antics. Then it kind of becomes like a little imagination sparking that you're just kind of curious how different cliched sitcom scenarios are going to play out using this dynamic, and how, kind of, if you think about your traditional sitcom plots, and then how do you make that realistic? How do you kind of come up with the real world ramifications that such a scenario would have? That's pretty imagination sparking. I found it pretty compelling to kind of think about where it was going in that direction. And then it really starts kind of sincerely going for it in both modes. Most notably in the prestige drama aspect of it. It builds up a pretty intricate, suspenseful plotline all around her trying to come up with a way to murder her husband and get away with it, which has all sorts of twists and turns and side characters. And then within the sitcom, they kind of progress through the typical seasons that such a sitcom would have, the introduction and writing off of different characters, and all of it is linked between the two fronts in a way that is pretty clever. But I think it's both a strength and a weakness, the fact that they really sincerely tried to make both of these shows. I think if they had just kind of rode the novelty of the gimmick and had each of these sort of just be an empty, loose parody of these genres, it wouldn't really have any staying power, and it would not really have any appeal beyond the novelty. But at the same time, yeah, like both sides were good. The sitcom mode I found genuinely funny. I like crappy old sitcoms like that. I shouldn't even call them crappy, but that kind of like broad appeal, not very intellectual, often disparaged genre of sitcoms that might include your King of Queenses and your Two and a Half Men's and other things that are full of like bawdy humor and just idiot type characters and stuff. And I think they really made an excellent representation of this genre. And they put in like jokes and stuff. Like they didn't make it like every joke was just how boorish and unfunny these characters were. They made these characters funny, and they made it seem like, a reasonably plausible sitcom with a ton of episodes and mini arcs and stuff. They didn't half-ass it at all. If this had aired on TV as just the sitcom half, you wouldn't really think twice about it. The Prestige mode I found pretty compelling as well. I don't really watch a lot of Prestige TV. Throughout this video, we're going to kind of touch on the hallmarks of this genre, if you can call it a genre, and what I like about it and dislike about it, but generally it's not, my favorite. It's not something I'm seeking out, but this one was good. I found the twists and the tension very compelling. I liked how unlikable the characters were. I think they made them pretty intricate and interesting and not just sort of flat cliches. There was a nice arc of friendship throughout the series between our long-suffering housewife and her next-door neighbor, who at first is very hostile towards her, but then begins to really empathize with her situation. All of that stuff was pretty good. But I think what the issue is, is that as they really ramp up in both directions, the conceit of it, this idea of, it's like these two kind of alternate realities or whatever, is just so inherently goofy that it ends up maybe a little too self-serious. Like, your suspension of disbelief kind of starts breaking down as it keeps escalating. Like, as the prestige genre part of the show kind of challenges you to care more and more about these characters and to accept these escalating plot lines and stuff. But then it keeps cutting back to this gimmick of, and the whole time this wacky sitcom is unfolding in the house, and he's going through this whole sitcom arc that has its own kind of compelling aspects. It's like you can't really get into the mood of both things, at least I found. And then the messaging of the show, which I found pretty valid and interesting. It's a very feminist perspective of how much this woman is suffering and how much this man gets away with because he's just sort of goofy and lovable. And I think, there's a lot of interesting questions about abuse that are raised by this. And then a lot of themes within the prestige half about addiction and kind of community support and these sort of interwoven connections that people have when they're kind of down on their luck, around faith and cheating and all this sort of stuff. It's interesting, but it actually starts to feel pretty cheapened by the fact that they're keeping up this gimmick, keeping up this system of cutting back and forth, which kind of becomes its own somewhat downfall. It was a very good time watching it. I really enjoyed watching it. But I don't think it was quite the force of revelation and, an utterly mind-blowing show in the way that it was hoping to be, kind of because of the very gimmick that made it noteworthy in the first place. So yeah, overall, I was still a big fan of it. I'd give it an 8.5. I think it's very solid, but I think it kind of smacks against the ceiling of what a show this gimmicky can potentially do. All right, before we move on, I'm just going to check my Discord messages quickly. Nice. Okay. Moving right along, the next show we will discuss is Fleishman is in Trouble. This is a show I picked up just sort of on a whim because they were talking about it on Red Letter Media, I think just in their wrap-up video. And it seemed really appealing to me. I like Jesse Eisenberg. I like Lizzie Kaplan a lot. I like stories about New York that are set in New York and kind of talk about the city. And all those elements really did deliver. It has a great performance from from both of those people. All of the actors were great in it. They gave these very subtle, neurotic performances that I think kind of conveyed a lot of their lot in life and their kind of social anxieties and stuff. It did delve nicely into basically two different social scenes in New York, which are compared and contrasted. And I thought it was pretty insightful in how those two kind of groups of people live. But at the same time, it also felt very, very limited insofar as it kind of never acknowledges the existence of people that don't fit into one of those two sets. One messaging thing that I really, really like, though, there was a lot of focus on New York as a city and its unique eccentricities, its challenges and opportunities. And something that the main character, Jesse Eisenberg's character, keeps emphasizing to his kids is like, you are in such a unique position to be growing up in New York. You need to like understand what it really means to live here. We're not going to just like send you off to the Hamptons all the time. Let's go to the museums. Let's go to the parks. Let's ride the bus. Let's ride the subway. And I found that like very endearing and just kind of like a great lens on which to portray New York City. I found that, you know, there is kind of a vicarious experience too, where I felt like that was a great way for me, who's like a big NYC file, to appreciate some aspects of living in the city through the show. The production was really nice too. It had this really kind of charming style that I associate a lot with like early 2000 indie movies. There's this kind of light narration from Lizzie Kaplan throughout the entire series that I found very kind of like literary and gives kind of like this nice sense of detachment. There's a very nice precision in how everything is shot and just the subtle lingering of some scenes, and just very, very nice visually, very well constructed. And some of the messaging was nice. I would say the various kind of theses that emerge from the show about, you know, what it is to be a good citizen of the world, and, you know, a good husband and a good father and all this stuff. I think in the very abstract, I agree with kind of what they're going for. But at a certain point, just kind of like how they represented the ideology of the characters and kind of how they illustrated their points about, you know, what it means to live a authentic and fulfilling life and stuff, I really started diverging in that, like, scenes where I was supposed to find Fleishman endearing, you know, scenes where you're supposed to really feel for him and want to see him succeed. That's when I started finding him, like, really insufferable. Especially, they keep making reference to the fact that when he was in, like, his early 20s, there's even some flashbacks to this, he took this wonderful, idyllic trip to Israel. Maybe it was his birthright trip, where he made all these wonderful friends that have been his closest friends for the rest of his life. And that was when he was like really himself and really got in touch with what was important to him. And it makes me barf. Like, I literally feel sick thinking about, you know, what kind of person would be able to idealize something like that to that extent. So that, yeah, like, I really started to disconnect with his character, and it cut the other direction too. There's scenes where he is meant to be neurotic and overbearing and overly idealistic, that he's just pushing ideas onto people and not really compromising on certain things. And I think you're supposed to be like, wow, this guy is not in touch with himself. He's not in touch with the people he cares about. But I actually found those moments much more compelling, because I would often agree with what he was saying, and I found all the people trying to make like counter arguments or like kind of bring him back down to earth to just be like missing the point so badly and so superficial and bullshitty. Like when he's talking about why he wants to be a doctor, which in this series is actually in the lower income social class of the two social classes we see. And he's kind of belittled by some of his wife's friends for not being in like finance or something and making like 10x more money. And then he's very, very firm and adamant about the virtues of being a doctor and how everything they're doing is just kind of useless bullshit, but he's out there actually trying to like save lives. And you're supposed to see him in these moments, you know, not as like an irredeemable monster, but you're supposed to kind of be like, oh, this is where the friction in his life is coming from. He's not seeing the other side. He needs to tone it down. No. He's absolutely right. And that's, you know, again, I was like really diverging. And then all of it kind of accumulates in this idea that his ex-wife, through his eyes, was acting very selfishly and unreasonably, and does some very kind of weird things that leave him in the lurch. But then as the series unfolds, you become more and more sympathetic to her, or at least that's the idea. But like, I got it, and I see that there's like kind of a good feminist message here around how so much of what she did was unrecognized, and so many of the ways in which she was suffering he like couldn't see, and I think all of that is well and good, but like at the same time she was just so obsessed with bullshit, and like none of the stuff she was doing was important. And all of the things that she was like really making herself suffer to achieve, I agree with Fleishman. It's like not important. You're just neurotic and you're obsessed with these sorts of things, and they're not important. So that point, you know, that big revelation of wow, like he wasn't so great, she was actually suffering. I was just like, well, I still don't like her. Like, yeah, she went through some shit, but I don't know, like a lot of the moments that are meant to be depicted as like really painful for her, I just don't get it. Like, I just don't understand how she could be so neurotic and superficial that was so devastating. And I guess that's my bad. And I don't know, like there's like a couple other scenes. I don't really want to get into this super much, but there's like this idea that that she had this like major trauma in the past, and that Fleischman was never really able to properly like comfort her and allow her to grieve that and move on from that. And then you find out what the trauma is, and it is very traumatic. Like, I don't want to downplay that, but just the way that it's depicted is like really weird to me, because one of the only like non-white or non-Jewish characters in the entire series is this. Actually, in general, the series comes across as like very racist, because I just remembered the other non-white character, and both of them are just like these really inhuman, like not at all empathetic situations where both characters just like do something traumatizing and bad because they're like ignorant. And it's like, I don't know. I'm not saying like the author is racist or anything. I think this is based on a novel, but it's like, it's revealing. It's revealing. I think what would have been much cooler is if this was a lot more like a Pynchon novel. And at the start, this is what I was hoping it would be like, where, you know, his wife disappears and leaves him in the lurch, and he has no idea where she's gone or why. And of course, it is that she's just kind of having like a mental breakdown from all this stress. But I thought it was going to be more like mysterious and conspiratorial, and he would uncover this weird labyrinth among all of these weird elitist rich fucks that would lead to some revelation about some abduction or something truly sinister. And I thought that would be pretty cool, but instead it's just like a very kind of milquetoast, straightforward, whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was okay. Like I said, aesthetically I really liked it, and the performances I really liked. But the fact that the messaging was so off for me, and I just really did not resonate with it in the way that I was supposed to, puts a pretty hard cap on how much I'm actually gonna like love this. Okay, let's talk about Barry. I love Barry. Seasons 1 and 2 of Barry are among my favorite prestige type TV of all time. I made a big video after Barry season 2 came out. You can go check it out if you're interested in a lot of my thoughts at that time. I was blown away. It's so funny. It's like one of the funniest shows I've ever seen. But it's also so tense. They build up these prestige type, you know, right on the edge. You don't know what's gonna happen. Anyone could die core scenes. It's so inventive in the way that it told stories, and just the way that Barry himself is characterized, and the sort of stories that can emerge from that. Just this weird kind of goofy irreverence, and all of these like strange messages around what it means to be an actor and stuff. Like, it was really just kind of sailing boldly into totally uncharted territory, I think. After season 2, they set themselves up for a huge challenge, because they finally hit a major climax point where the main conceit of the show, that Barry lives this double life as both a hitman and an aspiring actor, finally hits a climax where those two worlds start breaching with each other, right? Excuse me. So they can't kind of just keep up the routine and the suspense around that. So basically, they hit a point where the novelty of the premise wasn't sufficient anymore. Now they had to find novelty on top of the premise, if that makes sense. So rather than just sort of writing stories around who Barry is and what he's doing and stuff like that, they had to fold it in over once and come up with stories that reference the significance of other things within the story instead of just the significance of the premise, if that makes... It's hard to explain exactly what I mean. Like twists that are second or third order away from the initial premise. Things that care about itself. And I think this is very, very tough for a TV show to transition into, because finding the premise novel and entertaining doesn't necessarily mean that you like care about the characters or care about their fortunes and misfortunes and stuff. Like to start having second order stories about like side characters, it gets tough. And it's inevitable, and I don't think it's bad when a show transitions into this. Every show kind of has to build upon itself in this way. But I do think with Barry the results were kind of mixed. Some plots, I don't want to spoil too much, but when Sally, the other main character, gets her show on Netflix, it was amazing. That entire plot line, it was so hilarious, so fascinating, so poignant, so powerful, frustrating, but joyous, but intense, but deranged. Like others, like the entire kind of events of Barry's life in season 3 seemed a little too muddled, like too self-referential insofar as it expects you to kind of remember and care about all sorts of details across the show, which in itself isn't that bad, but it kind of also makes it feel a little underutilized, that instead of like major kind of climaxes resulting from small hints earlier on, it's just sort of like there, just kind of going through the motions, I guess. Like, because you've set up so many things, you have to execute on all of them. And then some, you know, when you move too far away from like the Barry and Sally dynamic, it just doesn't get as interesting. Like the way they depict all the different gangsters and stuff is like entertaining, but it doesn't really have this like core dynamic, and so it's like not really as interesting to me. It's just it's just become like a gangster show in and of itself, which is like not something I'm super interested in. And you know, it's just fine. So as I said, yeah, they've started to breach across the different plot lines in these seasons. If you look way back in this video I made after season 2, I made this very intricate diagram of who knows what about whom and who assumes what about what, and all these different lines of information disconnect. And here the diagram starts to collapse. Those bridges of unknownness start falling apart. All the characters start to interact with one another. And again, this is mixed results. Sometimes it's mind-blowing, cathartic, damn, this changes everything, truly awesome. And other times, like, kind of deflating. Like, oh, that's the big climax where so-and-so learns about this. All right, I guess we're just moving on. The ending, though. I'm sure anyone who has any kind of like curiosity about this show has either watched this already or at least heard some discussion about the ending. It really does live up to any hype you've heard about it. It's crazy. I've never seen a show end anywhere anything like this at all. The final scene, especially the final scene of the final episode, I was like screaming. It's just so well executed, and it's just like such an amazing kind of message to summarize the entire show with. Phenomenal. So overall, I would give this a 9. I think, I don't want to say, oh, it like fell off from the first 2 seasons, but it just sort of lost kind of like the simplicity and the charm of just sort of being able to focus in on this core premise. But they went for some pretty crazy big swings at the end of the fourth season that I really, really appreciated. All right. Now for a total shifting of gears, let's talk about sports. The Toronto Maple Leafs, my home team, my home NHL hockey team, had a run this year. I jumped on the bandwagon hard and started watching every game. For the first time since 2004, almost 20 years ago, they won the first round of playoffs. Yes, since 2004, the Leafs had never made it past the first round of playoffs. Often they missed playoffs altogether. The last few years, we had consistently been making it to the playoffs, but of course, losing in the first round every time. But in 2023, we made it flying out of the gates into round two, where we lost. So my boyfriend's dad, and then actually a surprisingly large number of my other friends are big Leafs fans, which isn't too surprising because, in Canada, hockey is a big, big deal, by far the most popular sport. In Toronto, the Leafs are a hugely popular team. It didn't surprise me at all to learn how invested so many people are in this, like, once in several decades run. So, I ended up watching every playoff game, I think, with a variety of people, often my boyfriend and his dad, sometimes just my boyfriend back at my place, other friends at bars, at other gatherings. It was a persistent element in my life for this entire series of games. I bonded with people over this. I was able to banter. I touched upon an previously invisible current of the city. I remember going to a friend's birthday party where there was like a lot of his family there that I had never met before. And I didn't really expect to have very much in common with them because, I don't know, it's just like his cousins and stuff. But we could talk about the Leafs. I would be able to discuss intelligibly the games that we just had watched, the players, how well they were doing, the strategic decisions, the bullshit ref calls. I found myself like ushered into this other society where this was not only a perfectly intelligible and compelling line of dialogue, it was actually the most in-demand subject of conversation. It was what everybody wanted to talk about. But, ultimately they lost in the second round. And I saw otherwise stoic people moved to some of the rawest emotions I've seen. It was like nothing else. Sports brings out in the sports fan a realm of emotions unseen anywhere else. But what was it actually like watching games? Because I'll be real with you. I am not generally a sports person. I am not the type to just throw on the game. And kind of like, my thinking is, it's just kind of boring because the games take so long and the play on screen doesn't really vary that much. And there's so many ads. It just stops so many times for so much bullshit that, such a small percentage of it is actually watching gameplay on the field, on the ice. Yeah, like too long, too repetitive. I always associate it with just hogging the TV, that I want to play my N64, but no, hockey's on. But the appeal, it's starting to reveal itself to me, bit by bit. The more sports I watch, not just hockey, but I've been watching some basketball, some football here and there as well. The more you learn, the more you understand about the strategy and the players and the history and the significance, everything, the more engrossing it is to watch the gameplay. Such that I don't even mind as much now when there's breaks, because watching the actual raw gameplay is often like so intense and so compelling that you feel like you need a break. It's kind of nice to just kind of like stop and chill and reflect during a commercial break and then back to the ice. You start to really hate the refs. The more you just completely want to die when you lose. It's so many negative emotions pop up too, but in totality, it becomes this very cohesive activity that I think is different than any other. Following a professional sports team, just the social aspects of it, the type of entertainment it is, the deep emotional connection you start to have. I remember talking to my boyfriend pretty early on following the Leafs and talking about how absolutely miserable you feel when they lose. And how when they win, you're just kind of like, well, they still got to win a few more. And, there's no real catharsis. There's no real relief. And it just kind of seems like net negative on the emotions of everybody watching. And he's like, well, yeah, that's true. But can you imagine if the Leafs ever actually win the cup, what that's going to feel like for all these people that have been watching for years, for decades, for generations? Just that charged emotional energy across all those years and years and years of losing, across the entire city, across millions of people, to set up that like spirit bomb that hinges on any given season, on any given game, on any given year. And I think that's pretty amazing. I think that is like an emotional state that could not exist without the institution of professional sports. So I'm getting it more and more. I have other beef with professional sports too, socioeconomically, to try to give a little leftist perspective on it. There's many things to have qualms with, but I don't know. Overall, I had a good time watching it. I'll give this an 8 as well. Because, it didn't reach the highs for me of other television, but it was a good time watching these games and chatting and hanging out. All right, speaking of hockey, staying within the rink, let's talk a little bit about Shorsey. This is honestly such a perfect complement to watching actual hockey. We would watch an episode or two after the game. It was great. And also, like, a very perfectly executed spin-off of Letterkenny, which is an institution of Canadian comedic television. And one that I really should watch more of. I've only seen maybe 4 seasons of Letterkenny, and they're up to, like, 10 now. It's going strong. Something that captures all the super dense, self-referential, and vulgar style of the original. Letterkenny is one of the most, like, tightly woven shows I think ever written. It's so full of self-reference. It's insane. Plus, I think this is something that Letterkenny and Shorsey execute very, very well that few other sitcoms even remotely attempt, which is like the super cinematic quality of it. Just the way that almost every episode has some like establishing shots or montages or something that are just like so high effort, so cinematic, and it creates this kind of feeling of like a hyper sitcom that can just sort of shift gears into this filmic mode at any moment. So original, so distinctive, and taking these kind of structural elements and this sort of philosophy and weaving an entirely new setting and plot around it. The whale shit no-show hockey. It's all about hockey players in their 30s and early 40s maybe, who are maybe a little bit over the hill, but, have some real chops, playing hockey up in Sudbury in the Northern Ontario Seniors Hockey League. I think, Northern Ontario Senior Hockey, I don't remember what the second O is, but that's the league they play in. Generally, it's nothing to speak of. It's whale shit, but they start to make their mark. As a comedy, I think it has all of the successes, but also limitations of Letterkenny. I would say both of these shows operate through kind of like comedy as formula, where the repetition and iteration and escalation of the formulaic jokes is kind of what makes it funny. A lot of like repeating catchphrases, all these very like tight, punchy, back and forth comments, jiving at each other. Jabbing? I think I meant to say jabbing. Jiving is not right. Jabbing at each other, roasting each other. What is the word I'm trying to say? Oh my god, we're not even close to finishing this video. And I'm already in the pit of flubbing. People used to say this all the time. Oh, quit chirping at me. Yeah, they chirp at each other. It's hilarious. It's like writing like nothing else. Just the way these characters trade insults with each other and make all these insanely tightly wound references and stuff. It's very funny. Extremely endearing characters, too. Despite the fact that everyone is kind of mean and rude to each other, they're really lovable, too. Especially Goody. Goody is my favorite character, because he's just constantly talking about food, and I can relate to that. But it's inherently kind of limited, too. I think you have to acknowledge. There's only kind of certain types of jokes you can do if you're going to be, like, adamantly in this mode. And there's not really much they can do to break out of these limitations because it is so like kind of bound to that rhythm. So there's not really like full scale comedic sequences that I think can be some of the best moments in other sitcoms, where they kind of go totally off the rails of any sort of like formula or mode, and just do something insane. But I think honestly, moving past the fact of it being a comedy and the fact that it's really funny, where it succeeds even more than that is the non-comedic elements. Like, as a sports series, I found it really compelling and really cathartic. Like, I really, really wanted them to win. In a way that I don't think I would have expected, given how silly and strange it is. I really found myself, like, invested in the outcomes of the games. As a character study, I found it, like, surprisingly deep. Even though it's also comedically shallow that these guys are often so single-minded and so, you know, incessantly defined by one or two traits or habits or whatever that they have to, like, execute and iterate on every single time. There's moments of subtlety to all of these characters. There's moments of introspection and vulnerability. I shouldn't say all of the characters, but some of the characters have these moments. And I found those like kind of surprisingly deep. I think especially because these types of characters are so rarely depicted, so rarely examined, with such love and such grace and such openness. And as a study of the themes around Sudbury, what is it like to live in Northern Ontario? What is it like to be an athlete that's aging? What is it like to be a star, but just in Canada, just for a subset of the Canadian population? And what is hockey? What does hockey mean to these people? What is unique about it? What is special about it? What is available to them emotionally and mentally and spiritually within hockey that they can't find anywhere else? I found that stuff really profound. And it doesn't shy away from discussing these things and making them major themes, and making them influential to the plot. But it really definitely weaves them into these rapid fire bantery conversations. It's quite the art form. I really can't wait for more. Season 3 is confirmed. This is like my haiku. I don't follow too many sports anime. It's rare that I get into them to the extent that I do Shorsey in terms of really, really wanting the protagonist team to win. But yeah, this is a banger. Here's our guys. I'll give this an 8.5. You know, it's not huge, mind-blowing, revelatory television. But it has some very interesting ideas and some very, very funny moments. Okay. Moving right along to the Eric Andre show. I watched the sixth season of this. I gotta drink some water. This is the first, like, really long video I've made in a while. I gotta get my stamina back for talking a lot, because we got a lot more videos to come. Okay. The 6th season of the Eric Andre show aired this year. And how do you even talk about it? I don't think this show is meant to be discussed and described and reviewed at length. It is not, you know, something that supports that kind of intellectualism. It is just something to be experienced raw. This nonsense has been going on for 11 years ago. Like, just think about that. Like, holy shit. For 11 years, he's been doing this nonsense show. And where once it was an extremely low budget, very DIY, you know, probably the cheapest show on all of Adult Swim when it premiered. It had this kind of like rawness, this punkness. It was, in a sense, very cool that he was just sort of making this art right on the fringe. And most of the guests back then were not celebrities. They were Tim and Eric type bizarro people that they'd probably found performing on the streets or in response to Craigslist ads and stuff. Nowadays, this is like an institution of comedy. This is one of the banner shows of Adult Swim, one of their longest running, most successful franchises. They have big budget sets. The pranks are like insane. And the guests are actually famous. Like, shockingly famous people will show up on this show. And all of that, of course, is in service not of something more mainstream or more appealing, but instead just delivering more and more to the sickos that love this imagination-defying intensity. You really feel like anything is possible because you know he has the money to support this, the sign-offs to support this, then the casting resources, the agency to support this. It really, really feels like anything could happen at any moment, because there are no limits anymore. I don't think the new stuff is strictly better, though. Like, the escalation is cool, but there was like a real charm to the early stuff. It truly weird. But it's admirable. I think that despite increasing in popularity, despite having more like money and careers and stuff riding on it, he just keeps escalating in abrasiveness, in being disgusting, in subjecting more and more famous celebrities to his reality warping attacks, just totally making them question their sanity as he subjects them to more and more elaborate nonsense in his studio. The grandness of his street stunts have become insane. I don't even know how believable they are anymore in terms of, is this not just kind of like a skit now that is being presented as a street stunt? Who is in on it anymore? I have no idea. It doesn't even matter, really. Like, as long as it's presented in that light and you just kind of have this raw idea of like, oh my god, he's just out there doing this stuff in public. I think it is still engrossing on that front, no matter what you privately believe. It's really satisfying. Very few people could resist selling out at this point, would resist, making it a little more marketable. But I think what he's found is that even the most deranged, grotesque version of this is still immensely marketable. Like, this sort of comedy is just really popular. Hannibal sold out, of course. Hannibal's like a fucking landlord or something. And then, and since I wrote these slides, Eric did something really embarrassing too, and signed his name on some stupid Zionist letter, but whatever, we don't have to get into that. But yeah, I think he's still reaching peaks. I think this season contains some of my favorite bits from the entire series. The Chet Hanks interview might be like my favorite celebrity interview ever. The Goober driver, I think, is like the hardest I've laughed at any of his like stunts. The Exterminator, with just like the surreal escalation of pulling out the magazine Exterminator Monthly where he's focused. Stuff like the Cold episode, which is just like an absurd joke about the oft repeated fact that he makes his studio like really, really uncomfortably, unbearably hot just to add another level of torture for the celebrities that come on. And then he does this Cold episode where he just goes, yeah, the regulations are we have to do a cold one, where he made the studio like freezing and all the celebrities are like shivering and shuddering. I don't know, it's so funny. It's so good. This scene from the Chet Hanks interview, it's like beautiful. There's this weird like dog barking music. It's just so good. So yeah, I'd give this a 9. I think this is still a very excellent show. Alright, let's talk about the latest season of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's been running far longer than anyone would have guessed. Another pretty abrasive, on paper, unmarketable and unlikable show that has attracted a very large cult following that loves it and is devoted to it, and will probably continue its run as the longest running live action sitcom ever. It's still staying very true to itself. It doesn't bend down to scoop up more audience members. It still keeps it pretty fresh, too. The result this season, it's okay. Only 8 episodes, which is a little disappointing because something I really like about long-running sitcoms is just the sheer volume of episodes they can have. Even if some of them episodes are just okay, I just like having that much content to watch through with these sort of like comfort type sitcoms. It's nothing as ambitious or experimental as the last season, which had the entire second half being a multi-part serialized story of their adventures in Ireland, which I quite liked. I thought that was very bold and had a lot of really neat stuff in it, but I'm okay with them having another season, or like always going back to their roots, just having kind of more normal episodes and stuff. That's totally fine. I think I would basically rate each episode like, this is in order, okay, good, excellent. Honestly, one of my favorite episodes maybe of the show ever. Then okay, and then a great one, and then another pretty good one. So, yeah, overall, good season. There weren't too many pure sitcom type episodes, which I would call ones where it's like they're in and around their normal environments of like the bar and their apartments. There's like an A plot and a B plot, some sort of theme. Things escalate, the plot lines collide, the characters kind of like team up with each other in some capacity and then become adversarial to the other teams and sometimes their teammates. And then there's some kind of big escalation at the end. That's kind of like their typical sitcom mode. Wasn't too many of those this season, which is a little disappointing because those are often my favorite episodes. But a lot of what I think is kind of like their second calling card now is like localized situation adventures where, oh, they're at the bowling alley, they're at a Chuck E. Cheese type place, and then we just kind of let the characters do what they will in such scenarios, and that's a lot of fun too. Yeah, these are becoming very standard in their formula. The Gang Does Blank, they've been doing them for, maybe like the last 6 seasons or so. And I'd say these have a very high floor insofar as there's a lot of very inherent comedy and just having these characters in these places. A lot of the jokes kind of write themselves. But it's also sort of a low ceiling too, because you can't really get that very engrossing, very hilarious like sitcom escalation dynamics. I'd say the biggest experiment this season had was the guest starring of Malcolm and his dad, which of course is Aaron Paul and my mind went totally blank. The guy who plays Walt on Breaking Bad and also played the dad in Malcolm in the Middle. It was pretty funny. I don't know. It wasn't like my favorite episode or anything, but I thought they kind of executed on that. And it kind of showed off some potential of 16 seasons in, if they decide to sell out and start having a lot of like celebrity guest spots, it shows that they know how to like execute on it in an interesting way and really bring out the strengths of these actors without it just being like very hackneyed, phoned in, whatever. Yeah, it's a more interesting way of doing celebrity cameos than most sitcoms have done, but at the end of the day, it still wasn't like that interesting. The chess episode, though. The one where they're trying to come up with a way for Frank to cheat and win chess tournaments. Crazy. I was busting a gut laughing. It was the hardest I've laughed at a sitcom like all year. It's just perfect sitcom writing to me. The A-bot plot, B-plot colliding, the callbacks, the escalations, the utter chaos and insanity by the end. And it also, just as the insane laughter subsided a bit, I had another real crazy making moment. I saw a Mandela effect manifesting before my eyes, where, the memories and expectations of the masses started to veer off significantly from history and the truth of what happened. We're already running way over, but I'll explain this in depth, okay? Earlier this year, there was a cheating scandal in the world of professional chess between Magnus Carlsen. Oh my god, I've done that before. And what's his face? Hans, last name irrelevant. Where Magnus accused Hans of cheating, okay? And this became a big controversy, a big scandal story, trying to investigate this. Ultimately, there was no formal punishment or conviction of cheating. But, you know, there's people on both sides around how suspect they found it and all this stuff, okay? And at the same time, there was a meme, okay? A joke, that maybe the way Hans had cheated was by inserting vibrating anal beads into his rectum, which could be triggered remotely to vibrate in, like, Morse code or something, to then tell Hans what moves to play as recommended by a computer, okay? This was a joke. No one believed this even remotely. It was just a joke someone made about how ridiculous the level of, like, cheating and counter-cheating measures and stuff had escalated. It was a joke. It's just a joke that caught on. This episode references that joke. Ultimately, that is how they decide to get Frank to cheat, and it collides with, like, a B-plot thing about anal beads. Vibrating anal beads. You know, this is the type of show we're dealing with, okay? So, that's funny. That's a neat little reference to this chess meme. It shows that they were obviously aware of this cheating scandal and some of the memes downstream of it, okay? Then, when I'm watching the climactic chess match between Frank and this Russian guy, and they're showing the actual moves, I was like, this is pretty silly to demonstrate such knowledge of chess memes, and then to, like, screw up a lot of, like, actual chess stuff. Like, I believe the Russian guy moves first as black. No. There's, like, a few other, like, illegal moves. No. And I was like, that's kind of weird. So I thought, I wonder if anybody has noticed these illegal moves, and maybe there's, like, a reference there I'm not getting either. Like, maybe this is another chess meme that I don't know about. So I go on Reddit, as I'm wont to do. I go to the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia subreddit. I go to the discussion thread about this episode. Like, everybody. Literally, I think I never saw this point refuted once. Everybody was saying, hey, did you know this is a reference to that time someone was caught using anal beads to cheat? They think that happened. They Mandela affected themselves to believe that the dude was actually using vibrating anal beads to cheat. They think that's the real history of events. And I was just, like, blown away by this, because it wasn't that long ago. It was earlier in 2023. And they never once read a news story that said this guy is using anal beads to cheat. They just saw, like, memes and their brain filled in the gap. And then thought that Hans really was out there. And it's just like, how does this happen? And I don't know, you hear about all sorts of other famous Mandela effects. Today I learned that Chick-fil-A is spelled Chick instead of just Chik. And I looked in my messages, and every single time I had mentioned it, I just spell it Chik. And I was like, what the hell? I got Mandela affected. It happens to everybody. But, like, to see it be born before my eyes was, like, so disorienting. Anyways, I'd say it's amazing to keep a sitcom going for 16 seasons without jumping the shark. I really don't think they've jumped the shark on this. They've had moments where they veered off in directions that I think, had they gone into them wholeheartedly, could have ended poorly. But they always kind of return to their core, return to their strengths, and I think it's still going strong. It wasn't like peak. I wouldn't say, this is anywhere near their best season, but I was excited for every new episode. I looked forward to it every week. I knew every episode had the potential to just be phenomenal and to have me busting the gut laughing. So yeah, good stuff. Gonna give this one an 8 as well. This, of course, is in the climax of the chess episode. Okay, next I watched this sitcom called The Other Two, which was finished by the time I learned about it. I think I saw tweets about it ending where it was described in several tweets as the new 30 Rock. And 30 Rock is basically my favorite sitcom of all time. Among sitcoms you could call like traditional, non-experimental, network, long-running sitcoms, 30 Rock is number one, for sure. I wouldn't go that far. But it was very good. And it was, in some ways, pretty similar to 30 Rock. For example, the fact that it is totally, like, pop culture obsessed. It's set within the world of pop culture. The plot is basically these two mid-20s, early 30s brother and sister have always aspired to work in the entertainment industry. The brother is an aspiring actor. The sister is trying to do various like agent type things and used to be a dancer. And amidst their kind of drifting, never quite getting off the ground careers, their younger brother, who's like 13, becomes this overnight Justin Bieber type viral sensation off of YouTube videos he made. And he just blows up and becomes like the most important person in the world. And it's just kind of all about how they deal with that and how they try to cash in on that and ride him to the top and stuff. So yeah, that setting lends itself to a lot of like kind of 30 Rock style humor. The number of cameos they got from celebrities and very surprising and often surprisingly trifling cameos, I think is very funny and very in line with 30 Rock, that would have celebrities show up and do the stupidest, most inane things, which I loved. It has this very disproportionately ambitious production. Very stupid throwaway jokes would have huge efforts done to realize them and produce them, which is, of course, something that I think is one of the greatest strengths of 30 Rock. Hugely creative settings, an incredible variety of just places where stuff is happening and motives for episodes. And I think this is something that 30 Rock was really good at, but this show goes even further with. And I think it's mostly around the way that shows and sitcoms are produced nowadays. Is a lot more about like on-set location filming, a lot more kind of like ad hoc location work. It doesn't have to be like 5 sets that you return to 90% of the time. And I think they play into the strength to kind of escalate even beyond 30 Rock in terms of having this like variety and ambition in the settings. Just very well constructed sitcom writings. We got developed themes. You know, an episode will be about something and then you explore that idea, that concept, how it relates to different characters. You have an A plot and a B plot, and there's some cohesiveness in terms of their theming, and then maybe they interfere with each other, or maybe the lesson learned in one kind of illustrates a situation in the other. Just good sitcom writing, you know? Like, that kind of stuff, I'm just always going to admire it. And they did great. It's a little more arc-focused than 30 Rock, but it's still very nicely episodic, that every episode does feel like it has its own setting, its own theme, its own messages. A lot of, like, feeling of, like, eras where, you know, there'll be some major development where a character's lifestyle will change significantly, and then we'll have a few episodes sort of exploring that era of the show. What are the characters now doing with these new dynamics? What kind of new opportunities do they have? What kind of ambitions? What kind of anxieties? Sometimes it felt a little bit too prestige TV-y, where they felt like, ooh, we can do some like really dramatic and emotional scenes, and you'll have like the last 5 minutes of an episode showing like, wow, they're down on their luck. Wow, the brother character is miserable and he's having this like revelation, and we're cutting back and forth between the two, and look, there's like this thematic kind of understanding and cohesion and stuff. And that's all fine. That's like good messaging and stuff too. Like usually the ideas that I was expressing I found pretty compelling and pretty like human, and you know, I found myself pretty attached to the characters. I wanted them to succeed. I wanted to see how things would go for them, but it kind of drags down the comedic aspect, you know? If you're going to do that, it takes it out of sitcom territory. It takes it out of being like a light, fun, comforting watch. Because you can do that stuff. 30 Rock has a lot of moments like that, but they last like 20 seconds. It's just like a nice little moment of poignancy where you kind of really humanize Liz Lemon and sit with that for a minute. And it doesn't have to be more than a minute. You don't have to have a whole little sequence at the end showing, the grand misery of the characters. Okay, so here's the big gap between this and 30 Rock. And this is really the gap between 30 Rock and like 99% of sitcoms, and I think pretty much any modern sitcom. And I can go back to all the other sitcoms we talked about in this video and apply the same kind of criticism. But what it comes down to is too much staff sanity, okay? The situations are funny. The characters are funny. Characters are very funny in this. The twists and escalations and weird shit happening in the plot, that's funny. But the jokes are just funny enough, okay? They're funny enough that they get into the script, they get table read, everybody laughs, and they go, that's a funny joke. All right, there's our joke. You know how it happened in 30 Rock? You know how it happened in the golden era of The Simpsons? You know what had happened in that manic cave where Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld sat for 12 hours a day? You know what they did on those absolute classic all-timer sitcoms? They reworked every joke till their eyes were bleeding. They would grind manically like all night, poring over every line of dialogue thinking, how can we make this funnier? What's the next level? What's the joke that their audience will anticipate, and how do we make it funnier than that? And it works. It doesn't necessarily sound like it would work because you want to think, oh, the root of comedy is in effortlessness and grace and a kind of casual affect. No. The root of truly amazing comedy, at least for me, at least the type of comedy I really, really love, it's in just maniacally squeezing out every possible drop of humor out of every situation. And this show doesn't quite go that far. And I think, if we look at kind of the other progenitors of 30 Rock, progenitors? No, progenitors is before. Prodigy. The Prodigy? The shows that followed 30 Rock, like Kimmy Schmidt, Great News, the stuff that the 30 Rock staff was involved with, I think this is kind of what holds them back from having the same quality and appeal of 30 Rock, is that they just went at it too sanely. And they said, let's leave at 5 p.m. I think this script is good enough. They said, well, it made us laugh, and I think it'll make the audience laugh, so that's good enough. No need to work ourselves to death. Let's get ahead on future episodes or something like that. And that's just where we are right now with all these fucking workers' rights. Anyways, this is a good show. This is a clip from one of my favorite episodes, and I think something that very, very nicely illustrates the appeal of the show. Eventually, their mom also becomes a big star. She becomes almost like an Oprah-type figure that has like a talk show and all these fans. And in order to let her have just a normal night out, they construct an entire Applebee's set. They don't tell her this. They tell her, oh, we're going to Applebee's, but people have agreed to be cool. But in fact, it's just entirely actors, and it's all fake. And they're just trying to give her the simulacrum of a night out. And it just becomes so chaotic and so funny. And it's such a good premise. And here we can see Simu Liu, who plays a recurring character as her boyfriend. And basically just is like a himbo and makes fun of himself a lot. And it's great. So yeah, I don't know. Overall, very happy with this. I'll give this an 8.5. I just think very, very solid. But could be funnier. Could be funnier if they drove themselves insane. Okay. Let's move on to How To with John Wilson. I watched the third and final season of the show. We see a truly suitable escalation to this very unique and very beautiful show in this final season. Because I think as the show got more popular, he had a lot of momentum. He had a lot of freedom within HBO's budget. He had this growing kind of weird pseudo celebrity status where he had his HBO pass and said, I'm filming an HBO show. And he could cite some viewing numbers. He could say, this is the 3rd season. And he basically could have done anything. He could have plowed unprecedentedly into any huge direction, any major stunt. He could have gone into space, probably. I was talking to some pilots, and I realized that maybe I would have a better perspective on life if I went higher up. So I drove to NASA, and they agreed to let me go up in a rocket. He could have done it. He could have done it. I don't know. But he didn't. He how to navigate zero gravity. But no. He took the appeal of the show. I mean, okay, there is some kind of stuff like that. There's a very funny sequence where he had been included on a list of Time's People of the Year, which allowed him to go to a very fancy party in downtown New York with all sorts of celebrities. He basically just stands around awkwardly and complains about being bored, and he doesn't want to talk to anybody, and then he just kind of wanders off. So yeah, it's like, yes, he is taking advantage of these unprecedented boons in his celebrity status, but he's not, escalating in directions that don't make sense for the show, that aren't true to him and his character. But then there's this weird inward reflective escalation, I think especially because the show was ending, where he really began to examine the artifice of his show. And this is a show that has very little assumed artifice. It seems to just be footage of this man who wanders around New York filming everything and just kind of talking to random people. But in this really mind-bending episode, he starts kind of making you question that and making you wonder exactly how it is the show gets made and exactly what parts are real and spontaneous and authentic and which parts are a little bit orchestrated by him. It's very mind-bending in a way that could only emerge from this very long experiment of this show after really establishing himself as the type of guy he is, really cementing this idea that he is out there just filming everything, which he is, and kind of knowing his history and the things that he made before this show. It starts to get really kind of loopy when you start to think about how is he living up to HBO's expectations of himself? How, now that he's had this show that's been a huge critical hit and has this amazing fan base, how is he kind of like accepting and working with the expectations of those people? But the real way that this improves upon past seasons that feels like an escalation in quality is in his own expertise in making the show. Essentially, he's just getting better and better where to go, what kind of people to talk to, what things to just go and look at, what events, where are these stories unfolding, where can he learn the sort of things that he wants to teach us. Like stuff like the vacuum collectors convention, or going to the community where they live off the grid, kind of like that movie Safe by Todd Haynes, or in the very moving and stirring finale going to the cryogenics party of people that are going to have their brains frozen after they die. It's like no one told him that those are the exciting places to go. There's no Google result that he could have searched that illuminated all those places as having those people that are so good to talk to, that are so revealing of so much of the human condition. People that would make me cry. I cried several times watching this season. There's just so many beautiful, deeply human moments. With his quirky, curious eye, the societal poetry he waves as he observes has become more sublime, more insightful, and more warm. I will truly miss this show. I don't know what John is going to do next. Before he was making this for HBO, he was just kind of doing this on his own and making short films with the same kind of wandering around New York and observing things style. Maybe he'll just go back to that. Just doing the same things but with no budget again. I don't know. He could do a lot of stuff. He's clearly someone who really understands something that I think very, very few other people have been able to focus on and articulate. An amazing show. This season, I would give happily a 10 out of 10. It's one of the best things I've watched this entire year, for sure. One of the best things I've watched ever. All right. Why isn't this animated? Okay. Huh? Okay. Hold on. Don't look. Spoilers. Animate. Fade in by paragraph. Are the rest of them... Okay, I'm gonna check. See if the other ones are animated as well. This one's animated. This one's animated. This one's animated. Why only that one? Why The Office only? The heck? What's happening in this chat? Okay, that's fine. Okay. Okay, so next we're going to talk about this little indie comedy that maybe you haven't heard of called The Office. The American remake of one of my favorite TV shows of all time. If we broaden the definition of sitcom enough, it might beat out 30 Rock as my favorite sitcom. The British Office. The American Office, I had never watched. First out of kind of hostility, because they took what I think is a very, very special, very important, very wonderful show, The British Office, and kind of stripped everything interesting from it and made it just the most generic sitcom one can imagine. I was kind of mad about that when the US Office first started airing, because I'd seen the British one before it even started, and I was like, wow, they're making an American one, that's interesting. And then I was just kind of disinterested in it because it seemed boring and not great. But then I kind of started seeing some episodes here and there, just sort of, inadvertently. I'd be at a friend's place, they'd be watching it, and they would be on a hotel TV or whatever. And I started being like, okay, this show's actually pretty good. Like, it's funny. And then I got really interested in it. Do I have points about this? Yeah, I didn't even cover this, but I made a video about the fanaticism around the US Office. The fact that for a lot of people, this is like hands down their favorite show. And they just watch it like over and over again. Like that kind of cultural phenomenon really fascinated with me. So I learned a lot about it in kind of researching stuff around that. I made a YouTube video about it called The Office, 2 Types of Cult Classic, which I'm really proud of. I think that's a great video, so check that out. Anyways, I still hadn't actually just watched the whole thing though. And this initiative, this undertaking to watch all of the US Office started because I was at a conference and I was in and out of my hotel room a lot, and I just had Comedy Central on a lot, and it was like always The Office. Like I watched like 8 episodes, I think, here and there throughout the weekend. It was just always on TV, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty funny. There was moments that made me laugh. Not bad. Good background noise, I'd be on my laptop, maybe doing some work, maybe chatting with people, whatever. And there it is. There's The Office. It's all it needed to be, and it was there for me. So then after I got back, I got very, very sick for a couple of weeks. I was just totally out of commission. And basically, I just laid the fuck up and watched The Office. Episode after episode, season after season, as I played a ton of F-Zero 99 and Suika Game, which will be covered in the upcoming video, 2023 in video games. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, even though it was just kind of background noise. I really wanted to articulate to myself, okay, like what stuff is working for me? What stuff is funny and why is it funny? What characters do I like? What kind of developments, relationships, situations do I like? And then even more, I really wanted to figure out what isn't working for me. Where is this falling apart? Where am I disconnecting from all of these people that are just like fiendishly in love with it? And I was going to actually make a whole standalone YouTube video about it. I had kind of structured this all in my head. I didn't get as far as making slides, but I was, articulating how it would go. There'd be four major parts. First was The Office is the friends we made along the way, which was, dissecting the fact that this show is just obsessed and really has nothing to do besides throwing the characters into romantic relationships with each other in so many smarmy, saccharine, stupid ways that I found like offensive, like boring at best, and then other times just like so inhumane and scary. And just basically the whole attitude the American Office has of like, we're best friends. You make your best friends at work. All the best moments of your life right here in this office. And just how distasteful I found that, and how it just spits directly in the face of every message from the original Office. But then, this was kind of like my first phase of understanding the Office. I started thinking more and more, though, there are a lot of plot lines that have nothing to do with romances or friendships or wholesome moments or whatever. And those are mostly around the actual, like, work plot lines. And this was something I really underestimated about the show because, like, it's not really the discussed aspect. But there's this undercurrent that, like, all these people's jobs at the office are, like, actually really important. And we're supposed to care about, the movings and shakings, the hirings and firings, promotions and demotions of all these characters, and really try to, like, invest ourselves in, like, the business plot lines, which is also pretty disgraceful and also, very, very contrary to the themes of the British one. But just kind of, like, interesting. Like, what is the next level of messaging then that suggests? And then the next kind of segment, layer of understanding would be about the office is the office is the office is the office is the office. That it seemed like they wanted to run the show forever. It became this deranged, zombified version of itself near the end, where certain characters seemed like they were either fully exiting or slowly being written off, and new characters were being brought in to replace them. And it just got worse and worse and worse, like less funny, less interesting, less original for sure, because they just kind of kept retreading the same plot points. Often with like self-awareness, often with some like jokes lampshading it, but like still just doing it with this grotesque, pragmatic mindset of, well, we gotta set ourselves up for like another 5 seasons. We gotta get some spin-off shows backdoored in. Let's do a backdoor pilot for Dwight's Farm. And it's just like embarrassing. And then eventually I think it just got like mercy killed. And I thought the finale was like bad and disgraceful and distasteful. Just all this stuff about how happy they were that this documentary got made about them, and just made zero sense to me at all. It was just kind of like shoving the emotions that the viewers were supposed to have at you without it making any sense for the characters. A lot of complaints. And then finally, I would kind of say all of this stuff, all of this negativity, though, I don't want to get bogged down in it, because there's actually like a very interesting way to parse this show, wherein a lot of these like negative aspects and a lot of this kind of like poor focus and mixed messaging and stuff actually is very illuminating for an entire other like theory of labor relations and workplace dynamics. And this is a series of blogs I read. And I was actually kind of excited to read these because I had heard of them before, but I knew they were all about the US Office, and I wouldn't be able to read them had I not watched the US Office. And then the blogs themselves were like much hyped up. It's called the Gervais Principle if you're interested. So Google the Gervais Principle blogs and you'll see this series of blog posts. They were interesting. They were pretty strange. It's basically like a kind of total social thesis written by someone who I would not necessarily trust to have the broadest or most unbiased perspective on social relations, You can tell this is a person coming from a very specific focus that's predisposed to kind of see things in a certain light. But given all that, the light in which they see things is actually very interesting, and I think does overlap with like the truth of the situation. So summarizing it as quickly as I can, it basically posits that the working relationship of something like an office is a 3-layered structure where at the top you have sociopaths that are merely trying to advance their state in terms of money and power with no ethical considerations and no respect whatsoever for the legitimacy of the company or what it's doing. And then there's a middle layer called the clueless, who are people that legitimately do buy into the messaging of the company and are earnestly working hard because they think that is what will be rewarded by the company. They're earnestly trying to make the company succeed because they think that the company's success is one-to-one with their success. And then at the bottom is the layer of losers, which is the vast majority of people in any given office that don't buy into any delusions around hard work and advancement and the glory of the company or whatever, but have merely accepted this kind of losing offer where they trade their time and their labor for some amount of money, and they know it's not really going to go anywhere else, but they seek fulfillment outside of work. So losers is pretty negative sounding, but these are like the normal people. These are like reasonable people. And basically these blog posts outline how you can observe all of these dynamics happening in the American office. And I think it's very true. I think even though I do not stake a whole lot on this as like a cohesive social model for reality, it does seem like a very good model for The Office and made The Office a lot more interesting as I kind of rethought some characters and developments and dynamics and stuff. So that's neat. I don't know. Maybe I will still make a whole video about this because I clearly have a lot to say about The Office. But at the same time, I have very little to say. Like it feels like so much about The Office just kind of goes without saying now. For better or worse, this is the modern sitcom. It defined all of the stylistic elements that pretty much every other popular mainstream sitcom has ripped off for like the last 15 years. And it's pretty good. It's like pretty funny. A lot of good funny moments. Good characters, good performances. A whole lot of crap I didn't like, but I had a good time. Give it a 7.5. It's solid. Okay. We're getting there. If we get under the 2-hour mark, I'll be happy. Let's talk about the 7th season of Rick and Morty. Despite Justin Roiland being outed as a total pedophile creep, the train keeps rolling along without him. I think it's really funny that they replaced the voice actors, and then there was like a huge outcry among certain Rick and Morty fans that they were like legitimately pissed off that the voices changed. It's like, what? Were these ever like nuanced, subtle performances? Is it not in fact like the most generic, like stupid voice that one can imagine? That's just like the whole shtick is that it's like just very hackneyed, over the top parodies of like old Jerry Lewis characters and stuff. Like what? I was never really super into Rick and Morty. I've been watching it since the start because I was like a Dan Harmon fan, sort of. I liked Community all right. You know, I wasn't a super fan of Community either, but I quite liked it. So, of course, I was curious about this new show he was doing. And I used to find it pretty interesting. Like, a lot of the high concept stuff kind of tickled me. Ones that really felt like weird Star Trek episodes where they would introduce some very high concept sci-fi premise, and then just kind of broke down the ramifications of it and kind of explored it and had a few twists and stuff. The early seasons had a lot of episodes like this, and I thought those were well done. And then even when they first started brushing with kind of like a continuity and a lore, like the backstories and recurring characters, and the fact that maybe certain things in the show will actually be consequential, I thought that was exciting. I'll admit it. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, where could they go with this? What kind of twists and stuff will they use this to escalate? But then it became so self-indulgent, especially with this kind of like continuity, this like backstory stuff. They really expected you to care about the characters themselves. They expected you to really like empathize with Rick and like feel bad for him because he was suffering about this and that. There's like an early-ish episode, maybe like season 2 or 3, where he like attempts suicide and there's like sad music playing. And I was just like, nah, this is not doing it for me. Like, I don't care. Why would I care? They just started trying to go into emotional space that they had like no business to. And without fail, every single time they've tried to do like a tearjerker or a poignant moment or something devastating, sad, no, it's never ever worked for me. I just roll my eyes. And then they also had some success pretty early on, like I said, with these episodes where it's like, let's take this concept and really explore how deranged it would be and all of these ramifications and stuff. But I think they veered off focus from being like, let's explore it as like a sci-fi concept and like explore it conceptually, to like, oh, well, here's the joke from that. Let's see how far we can take the joke. And it's like the same kind of structure. So I can kind of see how those two ways of writing bled into each other. But it's just not funny. Like, the joke would just get like less and less funny throughout the episode because you'd get like sick of it. And all of the twists and escalations they gave it, I would just get so tired. And it's like, they knew this is like the fault of their writing. Way back in Community, there's the episode where they get like a new social network, and they're like, well, hopefully this doesn't get out of hand. And then it like smash cuts to like this dystopian empire where people are like being enslaved based on how highly rated they are on this app or whatever. And it's like the whole joke of the episode is it's not that funny when we take things too far. We have to like be reasonable about how funny a concept is. But then nowadays, like, every episode of Rick and Morty is either some lore bullshit or, okay, here's one joke. I hope you think it's funny, because it's the only joke for the whole episode. So now I just kind of coast along on, like, inertia. Like, I've already seen 7 seasons of this. I'm not going to stop. And sort of like a meta interest where I'm like, all right, well, this is what Rick and Morty fans are watching. And I go on like the subreddit too, and I read the discussions, and I'm like, oh, so this is what they like. This is what they dislike. It's like interesting to me because I'm so fully disconnected at this point from how I'm supposed to be feeling about it. I would say this season has fewer terrible episodes than the last few. The last few had a few episodes that I was like so mad at that they were just so bad I was mad at them basically. But I wouldn't say this season had like any like good episodes either. It just had a lot of like okay episodes. Like sometimes there would be funny jokes. Sometimes the premise actually seemed pretty funny. But nothing that really felt interesting or like bold or cool sci-fi concepts. Nothing like that. Just like okay. I think their biggest problem, and this is a huge problem, is that they do signifiers instead of the thing itself, and yet they expect it to work as if it was the thing itself, okay? So they'll have a story where the thing that's supposed to happen is like a heartfelt sentimental scene. And so they do something that like has the hallmarks of a heartfelt sentimental scene, but done in this like very uncreative, uninteresting, systemic, efficient way, okay? And then even though it was just kind of like a parody of, say, a sad montage in a movie, or like an action scene, it would be like a parody of an action scene where they make some like superficial references to an action scene in a movie. They still kind of act like, oh, well, wasn't that like an epic action scene? Wasn't that like such a cool fight? Wasn't that so sad when you saw the life of this guy who just killed himself or whatever? No. No, you just like told me it was sad. You just used the signifiers of an actual thing from an actual thing, you know, an actual scene from a movie. You use that kind of music and that kind of cutting to make it seem like you're being, you know, you're recalling sad montages from movies. But that's not a sad montage in and of itself. It's just the signifier of it. And it's just like a hollow shell of references. And the internal lore, I don't fucking care. I just cannot give a shit about any of this anymore. Even then, it feels like I should give this like a 2 or something. Oops. What? There we go. But, I mean, I know it gets a lot worse than this, like television in general. So I'll still give this like a 6. Because, like I said, some episodes had some funny parts. And I still wanted to keep watching it. Even though, as I said, it was kind of like a weird, detached meta interest. I still wanted to keep watching it. So it gets a passing grade. Okay. Next we'll talk about Frasier. A lovely, lovely sitcom. The Frasier... I shouldn't say remake, that's not the right word, but a reboot. A new era of Frasier. The character has returned in 2023. We watched a few episodes of that too, and I was actually quite impressed. It had a lot of the same qualities as the original show that I really liked. And in general, I would say my life is undergoing a lot of Frasierization. Like, I don't know, just certain social circles I run with and certain things I'm doing more and more overlap with the lives of Frasier and Niles. Hopefully I didn't. Yeah. I was worried that I would start just listing off tons of examples, and then this would be like a 30-minute segment just talking about my life, which it doesn't need to be. Let's talk about Frasier. I felt like, yeah, this is time to watch through the entire series, which I'd never done before. I'd seen episodes on TV as a kid, and then I'd been watching episodes here and there with some friends lately because of this Frasierization. But I had never watched the whole thing in sequence, and it's actually quite a story-driven sitcom. Like, there's a lot of major developments and arcs and stuff. So I thought it would benefit from being watched like that. And it's been a blast. I'm into season 9 now. For the last few months, I've just been putting it on in the background while I work or play video games or do this and that. It's just a wonderful background show because it's mostly kind of dialogue humor and very kind of, I don't know. It's you can enjoy it a lot without needing to focus on it a lot, which is great. In many ways, this is just the perfect sitcom in my eyes. Like, I think the fact that it focuses entirely on this like snooty upper class lifestyle of Frasier and his brother Niles allows them to focus in on plot lines that are just all around irreverent mishaps, around manners, around faux pas, you know, around all of this just kind of bullshit that emerges in this kind of lifestyle. There's endless comedy to be had there. It never has to be grounded or, you know, realistic or have any sort of like weight to it. I mean, at times it does. At times it gets very emotional, but it doesn't have to because it's all about these snobs and their BS problems. Frasier and Niles' out-of-touch elitism is often the butt of jokes, of course. You know, they're made fun of for being nambly-pambly rich folks. But it's also funny in itself. And this is something that I think a lot of shows that aim for this sort of humor really lack. Is like Niles and Frasier will make all of these kind of high culture jokes around wine and Shakespeare and the opera and stuff. but they're actually funny in and of themselves. Like, they make puns based on Shakespeare that are funny. But then it's also funny that they're making these, like, elitist, out-of-touch jokes that nobody else in their life understands. Like, I don't know. That's way too rare, and I don't think it has to be, because it doesn't detract from either type of humor to kind of have that juxtaposition and to have that two-layer system of the joke is funny and then the context is funny. But you look at something like The Big Bang Theory, which kind of operates on the same mode of like, wow, these guys are so out of touch. What the hell are they talking about? But the things they say, like their nerdy references and stuff, are like not funny in and of themselves. Like they're nonsensical as statements. I don't know. It's just that little added bit of like effort is so important. I think this is a very well structured sitcom in that it has zones. I've talked a lot about this with my friends. I think this would be an interesting video at some point, talking about how some sitcoms operate through like a zones system, where there's like the workplace and there's certain characters that only really appear in the workplace and a certain type of comedy that results from those characters. Then there's scenes at home, there's scenes where he's out on a date. There's like a variety in this, but there's restraint. They can't cross-pollinate unless it feels necessary, unless it feels funny. There's kind of an excitement when these zones cross-pollinate. Then there's other sitcoms that like totally eschew this and just kind of have one setting and everything just emerges from there, like The Office. And it's not like one is better or worse, but I just kind of think like the writing that emerges from this is more closer to my like ideal sitcom. The way the characters' perspectives are so divided in so many situations, so much comedy resulting around from misunderstanding. Probably the most typical joke format in Frasier is the audience knows character A is talking about X, but character B thinks they're talking about Y, and they just keep making coincidentally misleading statements that, if taken in the context of Y, sound more and more ignorant or inappropriate or whatever. And that's just good writing. That's just good, clean fun. Like that to me is maybe one of the most reliably funny forms of comedy, and they've just mastered it. Very tight, clever A/B plot writing, and really excellent kind of aha moments where you recognize, hey, this element from plot A is certainly going to end up being a problem in plot B, and just kind of seeing that unfold. Really satisfying, really masterful. But with such a heart and a kindness too. It's really a very, very kind show where it's all about people trying to connect, trying to do their best for one another. I think in some ways this puts a damper on how funny it can be, because there's very little just outright cruelty or like malicious scheming against one another, which often is where the peaks of comedy and like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or Seinfeld hit. But I think this makes it so watchable, so comforting, so inspiring almost, like when I talk about the Frasierization of my life, it sounds stupid, but Frasier's like a good guy. He's like an admirable guy. He puts his foot in his mouth sometimes. He's got his shortcomings, but like, he really, really does want to do the best he can for the people he loves. And that's lovely. And there's a cute dog. Like, what more could you want? The one thing, though, that's kind of interesting, and something I've been talking with a friend of mine a lot about, is, like, does Frasier jump the shark? And there's a big moment in season 8 that my friend said he thinks is the moment where it jumps the shark. And I can understand where he's coming from. I'm not totally sold on that not being the case. It's a double negative there. But I think it's still pretty good. I think there's still been episodes in season 9 that like really impressed me, that had like really creative ideas and lots of really funny jokes. I will say this though, we're in season 9. It feels like it should end soon. It feels like they're gearing up for the end game in terms of like the characters' arcs and kind of their hitting points where they don't really need to do that more. And it feels like it's gonna hit a point of tedium if they can keep kind of regurgitating problems for them to have And this is the great balance with sitcoms, you know? It's not necessarily bad for things to change. In fact, that can often be one of the best parts of a sitcom is to have elements expand and grow and evolve. But whenever you have to balance that sort of evolution with the kind of like perpetual hell that is sitcoms, where the same types of problems keep reoccurring and the same sources of comedy keep being stumbling blocks and stuff, it can get to this like state of just endless purgatory, and I'm concerned that that's how Frasier is gonna end. But yeah, overall, I'm really enjoying it. Like I said, it doesn't quite reach the peaks of comedy of some other sitcoms. I think mostly because in the end they kind of stick to this core of morality and kindness. But it's still really good. I'll give it a 9 out of 10 very happily. Okay, into the end game now. What are people? 25 missed. Oh, man. Oh, they're talking about basketball. That's fine. Okay. Let's talk about the curse. Ooh, yeah. This is what I'm talking about. Oh, I am loving the curse. It was first announced way back in 2020. At the time, it was just this project where Nathan Fielder was going to be collaborating with the Safdie brothers. Then it was revealed that it was something to do with like a fake HGTV show. Emma Stone then got involved. That's somebody that I find quite interesting. Very weird, compelling actress. It just became more and more anticipated for me. It was delayed so much because of COVID and stuff. It started to feel like it would never happen. It was very surreal to start watching it, and it's like, wow, this is like a real show that they actually ended up making. It actually exists. I love both these guys so much. The Safdie brothers, Benny Safdie's acting work is just phenomenal. Nathan Fielder is one of my favorite people in just entertainment, period. This was like the Choco Peanut Butter Nightmare that I both dreaded, how insanely cringy and stressful it would be, but I dreamt of how amazing it was going to be. This draws upon so many different things that I absolutely love. Like every constituent element of the show, I think, checks a box for me in terms of just like my favorites in these genres. So much is kind of drawn from Safdie Brothers movies. They've done Heaven Knows What and Good Time and Uncut Gems in terms of major feature films, which are all among like my favorite movies just ever. And even though they didn't really do a ton of writing or production for this, I think their influence is very felt. I think they definitely set out in totality to make something in that mode. Just that dreadful, stressful suspense. Look, I'm an hour and 42 minutes into talking nonstop about TV. It's gonna be flub time. We're opening up the floodgates. The dreadful, stressful suspense that makes me feel so giddy. The weird, voyeuristic camera work. You know, just little things that really personalize this mysterious focal point that the camera is occupying. Little things like shooting things through a peephole and then kind of panning down in a way as if someone has stepped away from the peephole. Things like shooting a conversation from this kind of angle as if people are sitting at another table and eavesdropping, and then even shifting the camera a bit to track Emma Stone as she shifts behind like a pillar. It's so unnerving. It's so creepy. This style of shooting, the Lopatin Medeski Anxiety Core soundtrack, just phenomenal. The way they sequence shots, so long, plunging into these developments. It's like disorienting. I have so much to say about this. Like every point on this slide, I'm like, I wish this was a whole slide. I could just talk about this in depth. But it's so good. And then when we look at the three main performances, the three main characters, each of them is just so excellent in such different ways that I would have known I would love, but I just never had anticipated this amazing combination. Like, Nathan essentially plays the Nathan character, like the character of who he is on The Rehearsal and Nathan For You, and even way back with This Hour Is 22 Minutes and Nathan On Your Side. It's like the same character. It's the same mannerisms and anxiety and quirks and autism. The same kind of weird alien disconnect, but enthusiasm. It embodies all of those things. But now he's in this nightmare. Now he's in this Safdie Brothers situation, where so many things are going wrong, and seeing how his charming quirks that were so endearing in these previous shows are now crippling him and are leading him into these terrible situations that he just cannot navigate. Seeing like anger and paranoia and despair bubbling up from this character, this person, Nathan Fielder, that we've come to love over the last decade. Seeing those sides of quote unquote him, so chilling, so engrossing. It's like so hard to kind of like reckon with all these conflicting feelings you have about the character. At the same time, we have Emma Stone playing such a brutally painful satire of just the most annoying people imaginable, with zero self-awareness, just rampaging through all of these delicate social situations. This total embodiment of the liberal level 1 empathy that cannot understand the nuance or the subtleties of any person's situation, but just kind of has this total black and white material view of the world, centered entirely around things that she thinks make her a good person, but with like zero kind of actual understanding of anyone else's situation. This entirely like vibes based economics and material analysis of everything, like just the total encapsulation of like every annoying person on Twitter that I see talk about the economy, and I'm like, you are at level 0. Or I should say maybe level 1. Level 0 is just like raw conservative fear mongering, and then you get level 1 where you have this sense that you should be a good person, and then you just cannot at all analyze what that would look like in the world. And it's like amazing just how this show can get me, get like me personally so much on this level. Like these things that like piss me off, satirizing them so directly. I feel so seen. I feel so heard in such an amazing way. Like, I don't want to go and be like, yeah, this is like a leftist show. This is like a communist show or whatever. I don't think necessarily being pissed off at the same people means that we're going to agree in the positive about, you know, what better things actually look like. But it doesn't matter. It's just such a satisfying roasting of things that have just gotten me so acutely annoyed in the last few years. And then Benny is playing Dougie. Like, he's like a Tim and Eric character. Like, just his mannerisms and his outfits and the way he talks, the way he phrases things. It's at once, like, so perfect for the idea of this kind of scuzzy reality TV producer. But at the same time, it's just this, like, weird, inhuman caricature that feels like... at times, it feels like an Eric Wareheim character. At times, it feels like a Tim Heidecker character. Overall, it's just completely nuts and hilarious, but then sometimes like really shockingly like pitiable, and you know, you really relate to him and some of his kind of confusion and frustration, even though if you don't agree with him at all. Like you can understand on a very human level like why he's behaving the way he's behaving. It's so crazy. There's still two episodes up. There's one airing in like 4 days, and another one a week from then. I have a lot of questions still. I really, really hope they can stick the landing, you know? There's a lot of directions it can go still. A lot of like swords dangling over characters' heads. a lot of cards left in the hand of things they could bring back. I got a lot to say about this show. I think once it's finished, I'll really try to spend time making a complete video about it where we can really do some deep thematic analysis, articulate a little better what it's satirizing and why I think these satires are important and stuff. But this is already among like one of my favorite TV shows of all time. Like this is just so special to me. This is another easy 10 out of 10. I mean, it's not like it's flawless. I have some complaints with certain like storytelling directions. I think the fact that it's a TV show means that they kind of operate in this sort of prestige TV mode a little bit too much, in my opinion, to the detriment of kind of the more unique qualities of it. But like it's still just an easy 10 for me. Like it's still just in the absolute top echelon of stuff I like to watch. Okay. We've made it to our final show. I was gunning for a sub 2 hour time, but I don't think it's to be because I got a lot to say about Family Guy. Here we end with one of the most consistent entertainments throughout the entire year. Watching Family Guy cuddled up with my boyfriend. It's just, in many ways, one of our default activities. Let's throw on a Family Guy. Why not? We're laughing. We're crying. It's spilled over a lot and infected our mimetic life and vocabulary in ways that I won't get into, but it's like a brain worm. Family Guy. Phrases and character names. It hardly feels like a real show. It's almost like surprising sometimes to remember that this is all branching out of an adult animated comedy. But it is a real show. And I think it's an extremely underrated show, okay? Because it's become the butt of so many online jokes about, like, the downfall of animated sitcoms. Like, Family Guy is the tipping point where it all went wrong. And it's true, because there's, like, hundreds and hundreds of Family Guy ripoffs. And as far as I can tell, they all suck. Like, I don't think there's really anything redeemable about any of them. It's had disastrous consequence on the state of comedy. I won't deny that. But Family Guy itself, I don't know. There's another layer too. You see this kind of rhetoric on Twitter a lot, where people watch clips of it on YouTube or they're shared on Twitter or whatever, and then they're like, "Wait, no, this show's actually pretty funny. A lot of these jokes are funny," and it's true. A lot of the really passed around clips and stuff are just like very funny jokes, like just well written, good clean fun, just setups, punchlines. It's there. There's a lot of funny moments across this show's like 80 seasons or whatever. But the real ones, like me and like my boyfriend, we go right to the source. We watched actual complete episodes, which is a very, very different experience than watching clips. Even though we'll get into this. Yeah. You might think, what's the difference? Because Family Guy itself is almost like a clip show. But there's really nothing else quite like it in terms of how this show is written. Because, yeah, the jokes are largely total non sequiturs, okay? The oft parodied aspect of Family Guy that they're just drawing jokes out of a hat, or like the South Park thing where the jokes are written by manatees randomly making chains of balls or something. That's pretty true. They're largely just total non sequiturs. But there's like a logic to how they're deployed. There's a rhythm to it. I'm not even going to begin to articulate what that logic is, because it's beyond my own brain. It's too complex and nuanced and subtle for me to break down why they choose the jokes when they choose them. But there is something to it when you're watching it, that it just like makes sense to, oh, well, now they gotta have a celebrity joke. Now they gotta have a reference to something from the 50s that only Seth MacFarlane cares about. Now they gotta have a meta joke that's actually shockingly funny. Now they gotta have a racist joke. And you cringe, and you go, Jesus, why? They gotta do it. It's just building up this weird rhythm to the episode. And then, because the plots can really be about anything, it doesn't really matter, because the vast majority of the comedy does not have to connect to the plot at all. the plots can be about anything. So they end up like really weird. Like, if you just read synopsises of Family Guy episodes, if you don't have time to, watch the show and have a good time and laugh and cry, just reading the synopsises, you're just like, why would they make an episode about this? Like, what are they doing? Sometimes they're just bizarrely mundane and like barely anything happens. Sometimes they start off in mundane and then veer off in really strange directions because it doesn't matter. The actual plot lines of the episodes are just a means to an end. And that really adds something to it. I think what it facilitates is the idea that the main plot can go anywhere. It can end at any time. Nothing has to make sense. Nothing has to get resolved. And then the jokes can also be anything. They can be total non sequiturs. They can draw upon any pop culture reference from the last century at any point. They can be totally off the walls meta at any moment. They can make total nonsense with anything ever. And they can even suck. And a lot of the jokes really do suck, okay? I'm not denying that. There's a lot of really, really unfunny jokes in Family Guy. And, that's kind of part of the appeal, is that we groan at them. And I'm shocked, and we laugh at how shocking it is that they make some, like, sometimes really, like, racist, really offensive jokes. But you just feel like anything is on the table. Any given joke could be so funny or so unfunny. Like, the entire scale of comedy is open to you. Any genre of comedy is there, just waiting. There's like an anticipation that I think is very perpetuated by this kind of rhythm and logic of the jokes, that makes it a very, very unique and enthralling experience. I'm pro Family Guy. I'll go on the record. Do I like it more than The Simpsons? Hell no. But do I like it? Yeah, I like Family Guy. This is one of my favorite jokes in all the episodes we watched. Real Family Guy heads will remember this one. In the end, though, I'll still just give it an 8. Like, even though it's like very unique and it feels very deliberate and kind of expert in the way that it is crafted in this way, I can't in good faith say it's better than like other shows that are just like good shows, Family Guy is just its own thing, and it's good, but I'm not gonna be like, yeah, this is on par with Frasier. No, it's different. Okay, that's it. We talked about a lot of shows. We talked about 14 shows, I guess. 13 shows? Yeah, 14 shows. Well, yeah, it's like 29 divided by 2 minus 1. We talked about 14 shows. It's a good number of shows. Thank you for sticking with me for the last 2 hours, or jumping around and getting to the end here. I had a lot of fun making this. I had a lot of fun watching all these shows. I'm going to do this again next year, hopefully. I might do it more frequently next year. Like, maybe we'll do it biannually or even quarterly, such that it doesn't have to be this giant video right at the end. But yeah, look forward to more 2023 videos. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.